November 3rd, 2023. Marcus Castellano hadn't stepped into a fighting ring in 28 years. The arthritis in his knuckles screamed every morning. His left knee buckled when it rained. But when his daughter Sophia threw the blood-red invitation on his workbench and said those words, "If you're a real Alpha King, prove it in my arena," everything changed. The invitation bore Vincent Torino's signature, the man who destroyed him, the man who knew what really happened the night Tommy Ricci died in that Chicago warehouse ring in 1995. Sophia needed $2 million, her daughter needed surgery, and Torino was offering both if Marcus could survive what he'd built. What Marcus didn't know was that Sophia had already accepted. She'd signed the contract, and tomorrow night, in an abandoned steel mill outside Gary, Indiana, 3 generations of Castellanos would enter an arena where only one walks out alive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus stared at the invitation until the crimson lettering blurred. 28 years of trying to forget, and Vincent Torino had found him in this grease-stained corner of Blue Island like a cancer that never stopped spreading. "You signed what?" His voice cracked like old leather. Sophia stood in the doorway of Castellano Auto Repair, her designer coat incongruous against the oil-stained concrete and rusted tools. She'd inherited his dark eyes, but where his had grown hollow with defeat, hers burned with desperate fury. "Emma has 6 weeks, Dad. 6 weeks before the tumor." "You don't understand what you've done." Marcus's arthritic fingers crushed the invitation. "Torino doesn't run tournaments. He runs executions." A hydraulic hiss echoed from the adjacent bay where his employee Miguel worked under a Buick's hood, oblivious to the conversation that was about to destroy what little remained of Marcus's carefully constructed anonymity. For 15 years, he'd been just another broken-down mechanic who talked too much about fights nobody remembered. Now the past had walked through his door wearing his daughter's face. "The contract's already filed," Sophia said. 3 fighters. Winner takes $2 million. I saw the roster. There's you, me, and someone they're calling the Reaper. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. "You put yourself in the ring?" "I've been training for 3 years. Mixed martial arts, boxing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I'm not the little girl who used to watch you through the gym windows." But she was. God help them both. She was still that 8-year-old kid with pigtails who'd believed her daddy was invincible, who didn't know he'd sold his soul for an envelope full of cash and a promise that nobody would get hurt. Tommy Ricci had gotten hurt. Tommy Ricci had gotten dead. "Torino killed my best friend," Marcus said quietly. "Now he wants to finish what he started." "Then don't let him." Sophia pulled a manila folder from her coat. "I know about 1995. I know about the fixed fight, the money, Mom leaving. I know about Tommy." The folder hit the workbench like a gunshot. Inside were newspaper clippings, police reports, medical examiner documents, all the pieces of the night that had haunted Marcus for decades, laid out like evidence at a trial. "You know what the papers said," Marcus corrected. "You don't know what really happened." Sophia's composure cracked. "Then tell me, because in 6 weeks my daughter, your granddaughter, is going to die, and this tournament is the only way I can save her." The weight of 3 generations pressed down on Marcus's shoulders. Emma. Sweet, brilliant Emma, who'd never met her grandfather because Sophia couldn't forgive him for destroying their family. The little girl who drew pictures of superheroes and believed the world was full of people who saved the day. Miguel's radio crackled to life across the garage, a Spanish news station reporting on another shooting in Cicero. The mundane horror of everyday violence, the kind that didn't make national headlines or million-dollar tournaments. The kind Marcus had spent 15 years trying to disappear into. The night Tommy died, Marcus began, then stopped. Some secrets were too dangerous to speak aloud, even to family, especially to family. Sophia leaned against the workbench, and for a moment she looked exactly like her mother. Beautiful, fierce, and utterly unwilling to back down. "I'm going to Gary tomorrow night whether you come or not." "But if there's something you're not telling me, something that could keep me alive in there." Marcus looked at his hands. 40 years ago they'd been weapons. Now they could barely grip a wrench without pain shooting up his forearms. But muscle memory was a stubborn thing, and some instincts never died. Torino didn't just fix fights, he said finally. He filmed them. Private customers, men with too much money and too little conscience. They paid to watch people break. And you knew this? I suspected. But I needed the money, and I told myself it was just one fight, one dive, one payday, and I'd get out clean. Marcus laughed bitterly. Nobody gets out clean from Vincent Torino. Sophia absorbed this like a body blow. What happened to Tommy? Tomorrow, Marcus said. If we're really doing this insane thing, I'll tell you everything tomorrow. But right now, we need to prepare for a war. The invitation lay between them like a gauntlet thrown down by history itself. Marcus Castellano, the Iron King who'd ruled Chicago's underground before falling from grace. Sophia Castellano Martinez, the daughter who'd built her life around the hole her father had left. And somewhere in a children's hospital, Emma Martinez, the little girl who'd never know how much blood would be spilled to save her life. Outside, November wind rattled the garage doors, carrying the smell of industrial decay and approaching winter. In 18 hours, they'd be standing in Vincent Torino's arena, where the past and present would collide in ways that only one of them might survive. Marcus picked up the invitation one last time, noting details he'd missed before. The location, the time, the small print that made his stomach turn to acid. No witnesses, no cameras, no escape. Vincent Torino was calling in his debts, and the collection was about to begin. The invitation fell from Marcus's trembling fingers, crimson lettering face down against the oil-stained concrete. In the sudden silence, the garage felt like a tomb, cold, airless, weighted with the gravity of decisions that couldn't be undone. Sophia's breathing had gone shallow. "Dad?" Marcus closed his eyes, and for a moment he was 30 again, standing in the old Iron Palace gym on Halsted Street, the smell of leather and sweat, the rhythmic percussion of heavy bags, the sound of his own voice calling out combinations to fighters who hung on his every word. Back when he was the Iron King, when his name meant something other than disappointment and betrayal. "There's something you need to see," he said quietly. He walked to the far corner of the garage, where a dented filing cabinet sat beneath a calendar from 2019 that no one had bothered to replace. His arthritic fingers fumbled with the bottom drawer, pushing past tax documents and repair invoices until they found what he'd hidden there for 15 years. The photograph was creased and yellowed, but Emma's face smiled back at him with perfect clarity. 8 years old, missing 2 front teeth, wearing a Cubs jersey that hung to her knees. Sophia had sent it 3 years ago, the only communication between them since the divorce, with a single line on the back, "Her name is Emma. She asks about her grandfather sometimes." Marcus had stared at that photograph for hours, memorizing every detail. The way Emma's dark hair caught the light, exactly like Sophia's had at that age, the fearless grin that reminded him of himself before the world, taught him that courage could be bought and sold like any other commodity. "You kept it," Sophia whispered, appearing at his shoulder. "She looks like you did. Before—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Before I destroyed everything. Before your mother packed your bags while I was passed out drunk on the couch. Before you stopped believing I was worth saving." Sophia took the photograph with careful hands. She draws pictures of fighters, you know. Knights and gladiators, heroes who save people. Last month, she drew herself with a sword, protecting a castle full of sick kids. The words hit Marcus like a body shot to the liver. Here was his granddaughter, a child he'd never met, never held, never been allowed to love, dreaming of being the kind of fighter he'd once pretended to be. The kind who fought for something other than money and ego. "The treatments aren't working," Sophia continued, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of Miguel's radio. "The experimental therapy in Germany, it's our last option. $2 million for a chance to save her life." Marcus understood desperation. He'd lived with it for 28 years, felt it eating away at his insides like acid. But this was different. This wasn't about past mistakes or wounded pride. This was about innocence, about a little girl who'd never done anything wrong except inherit the Castellano blood that seemed to attract violence like a magnet. Sofia, there are things about Torino you don't understand. Things about that night. Then help me understand. She spun to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Because right now all I know is that my daughter is dying, and you're the only person who might be able to keep me alive long enough to save her. The garage door rattled again, and through the grimy windows, Marcus could see the first snowflakes of winter beginning to fall. November in Blue Island, where dreams went to die and broken men learned to fix engines instead of lives, where the Iron King had become just another ghost haunting the ruins of industrial Chicago. But as he looked at his daughter, really looked at her, Marcus saw something that made his chest tighten with a mixture of pride and terror. Sofia had inherited more than his eyes and his stubborn streak. She'd inherited his killer instinct, the cold calculation that had made him a legend in the underground circuit. The difference was she still had something worth fighting for. The third fighter, Marcus said suddenly. The one they're calling the Reaper. That's not a nickname. Sofia's expression sharpened. What do you mean? Torino doesn't pick names randomly. Everything he does has a purpose. Marcus retrieved the invitation from the floor, studying the elegant script that concealed so much malice. In the old days he had a fighter, never saw his real face, never heard his real name, just the Reaper, fought like something that crawled out of hell. You faced him? Once. Exhibition match, 1994. I barely survived. Marcus rubbed his ribs unconsciously, remembering the sound of bones cracking. If Torino brought him back, the implications hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't just about money or revenge. This was about completing something that had started decades ago, a final accounting for sins that had compounded interest for too many years. Outside, the snow began falling harder, and Marcus Castellano, the Iron King who'd lost his crown, the father who'd failed his family, the grandfather who'd never been allowed to love, made a choice that would change everything. 18 hours, he said. We train. Sofia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, nodding at her father's words, when the burner phone in Marcus's toolbox began to ring. The sound cut through the garage like a blade, harsh, insistent, wrong. Marcus had bought that phone 5 years ago for parts orders and emergency calls. 3 people had the number, Miguel, his landlord, and the VA clinic. None of them called after 9 p.m. Don't answer it, Sofia said, but Marcus was already moving. The phone felt like ice in his palm. Unknown number, Chicago area code. He almost declined the call, but something, instinct, paranoia, the weight of too many years carrying secrets, made him swipe to accept. Marcus. The voice was silk over broken glass, cultured and patient. It's been far too long. Vincent Torino. Even after 3 decades, Marcus would have recognized that voice in his nightmares. Sofia's eyes went wide as she watched the color drain from her father's face. What do you want, Vincent? Want? I want many things, old friend. I want the Chicago skyline to stop changing. I want my knees to stop aching when it rains. I want Thomas Ricci to still be alive so I could kill him properly this time. A pause, filled with the sound of expensive liquor being poured. But tonight, I simply want to chat. Marcus activated the speakerphone with shaking fingers. If Torino was calling, if he'd tracked down this number, then nowhere was safe anymore. I see you've been reunited with your daughter. How touching. She's quite remarkable, isn't she? 3 years of training, impressive dedication. Though I suspect she hasn't told you about the Delgado brothers. Sofia went rigid. Marcus had never heard that name, but the fear in his daughter's eyes told him everything he needed to know. Yes, Marcus. Your little girl has been making quite a name for herself in the underground circuits. Detroit, Milwaukee, that charming little warehouse in Cicero where they don't ask questions about medical licenses. Sofia, may I call you Sofia, has won 14 fights in 18 months. Brutal efficiency. You'd be proud. You son of a bitch, Sofia whispered. Torino's laughter was like champagne bubbles bursting. Such language. But you're upset, and I understand. Learning that your private crusade wasn't quite so private must be jarring. Did you really think you could train with Johnny Morales and not have word get back to me? Johnny's been on my payroll since 2003. Marcus felt the world shifting beneath his feet. His daughter hadn't just signed up for Torino's tournament on a desperate whim. She'd been fighting, really fighting, not the sanctioned amateur bouts he'd imagined, but underground, bare-knuckle, blood-soaked affairs where careers ended with permanent disability. The Delgado brothers run a small operation out of Gary, Torino continued conversationally. Nothing too elaborate, debt collection, insurance fraud, the occasional kidnapping. But they owed me a considerable sum, and Sofia provided such an elegant solution. 2 fights, 2 victories, 2 very dead Delgados. The younger brother lasted almost 4 minutes. Impressive. That's impossible, Marcus said, but his voice carried no conviction. He was looking at his daughter, really looking, and seeing things he'd missed before. The scarred knuckles, the way she favored her left shoulder, the cold calculation in her dark eyes that he recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror 40 years ago. Oh, Marcus, you still don't see it, do you? This tournament isn't happening because Sofia answered my invitation. She received my invitation because the tournament was already happening. Everything, her training, her underground fights, even her daughter's illness. It's all been leading to this moment. The garage went silent except for the wind howling through the gaps in the corrugated metal walls. Marcus felt something breaking inside his chest, some final barrier between the man he'd tried to become and the killer he'd never stopped being. Emma's cancer isn't random, he said. It wasn't a question. Environmental toxins are such a mystery, aren't they? That lovely apartment complex where Sofia lives, built on such contaminated ground. The previous owner was very careless with industrial waste disposal. Of course, I bought the property from him in 2018. Such a generous landlord I've been, keeping the rent so reasonable. Sofia's knees buckled. Marcus caught her before she hit the concrete, feeling the tremors running through her body like electrical current. 28 years, Marcus. 28 years I've been crafting this moment. Did you think Tommy's death was the end of our story? It was the prologue. Everything since then, your exile, your daughter's anger, your granddaughter's birth, all of it has been my design. The line went dead, leaving father and daughter alone in the sudden silence. Marcus looked down at Sofia, saw his own horror reflected in her eyes, and understood that Vincent Torino had already won. The tournament was just theatre, a final performance in a play that had been running for 3 decades. Outside, the snow fell harder, covering Blue Island in white that would be grey by morning. For 30 seconds, neither of them moved. Sofia remained crumpled against Marcus's chest, her breathing ragged, while he stared at the dead phone in his hand like it might bite him. The weight of Torino's words settled over the garage like a toxic fog. "We run," Marcus said finally. "Tonight, we take Emma and disappear. Canada, Mexico, doesn't matter where." Sofia pulled away from him, wiping her face with trembling fingers. "With what money? And how far do you think we'd get?" "You heard him. He's been planning this for 28 years. There has to be another way." But even as he said it, Marcus knew better. Men like Vincent Torino didn't make idle threats. If he'd orchestrated Emma's illness, if he'd been manipulating Sofia's underground career, then running would only delay the inevitable. Torino had the patience of a spider and resources that stretched far beyond Chicago. Sofia stood on unsteady legs, pacing to the grimy window where snow continued to fall. "The Delgado brothers," she said quietly. He wasn't lying about that. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Sofia!" They had Emma's photo, Dad, in their gym, pinned to a dartboard with her face circled in red ink. Her voice was hollow, mechanical. "They told me exactly what they'd do to her if I didn't throw my next 3 fights. So I killed them instead." The confession hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Marcus had suspected his daughter was tougher than she appeared, but this was something else entirely. This was the kind of cold-blooded calculation that took years to develop, the mindset of someone who'd already crossed lines most people never even approached. How? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Car accident. Made it look like they lost control on Lower Wacker during rush hour. Sophia turned from the window, and Marcus saw his younger self reflected in her eyes. The same lethal focus that had made him a legend before it destroyed everything he loved. Johnny Morales helped me plan it. Said it was cleaner than making them disappear in the ring. Johnny Morales. Marcus remembered him from the old days, a slick-talking trainer who'd moved between gyms like a con artist working a long game. If Johnny had been feeding information to Torino while training Sophia, then every punch she'd thrown, every technique she'd learned, had been catalogued and analyzed. "We're walking into a trap," Marcus said. "We've been in the trap for 3 years. Maybe longer." Sophia retrieved the tournament invitation from the workbench, studying the crimson lettering. "The question is whether we fight our way out or let him close it around us." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to find some third option that didn't involve his daughter stepping into a ring with killers. But the mathematics were brutal and simple. Emma needed $2 million, and Vincent Torino was the only person offering that kind of money. Everything else was just details. The garage door rattled again, and both of them froze. Through the snow-covered windows, Marcus could see headlights approaching, a black SUV with tinted windows that screamed federal agents or private security. Either option meant trouble. "Back door," Marcus whispered, but Sophia was already shaking her head. "If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. This is something else." The SUV parked 30 yards away, engine running, exhaust visible in the cold air. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. No one got out, no doors opened, no movement at all except the steady rhythm of windshield wipers clearing away snow. Then Marcus's landline began to ring. The old rotary phone sat on his cluttered desk like a relic from another century. Marcus hadn't given out that number in years. It was listed in the phone book under the shop's business registration, but nobody used landlines anymore. Nobody except people who understood that some conversations required untraceable connections. "Answer it," Sophia said. Marcus lifted the heavy receiver, the coiled cord stretching as he brought it to his ear. No voice greeted him, just the sound of breathing and distant traffic. Then, finally, a woman's voice, young, nervous, with the careful diction of someone trying to disguise their accent. "They're watching you now, both of you." Black SUV, 2 men probably armed. Who is this? Someone who knew Tommy Ricci, someone who remembers what really happened that night. A pause, filled with the sound of car doors slamming in the background. "Torino doesn't just want you in his tournament, Mr. Castellano. He wants you to know that nowhere is safe. Not for you, not for Sophia, and especially not for Emma." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at the silent receiver. Outside, the SUV's engine had stopped. Through the grimy windows, he could see 2 figures in dark coats approaching the garage, their movements deliberate and unhurried. Vincent Torino was tightening the noose, and Marcus Castellano, the Iron King who'd thought he could hide in plain sight for 15 years, was about to discover just how thoroughly his past had finally caught up with him. The receiver clattered against the desk as Marcus dropped it, his arthritic hands suddenly useless. Through the garage windows, the 2 figures in dark coats had stopped 10 feet from the door, waiting with the patience of undertakers. "Dad?" Sophia's voice came from far away, though she stood right beside him. Marcus couldn't answer. The woman's voice on the phone had unlocked something he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it never happened. Someone who knew Tommy Ricci. Someone who remembered what really happened that night. But everyone who'd been there was dead. Torino had made sure of that. The memory hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. October 15th, 1995. The Riverside warehouse. Tommy bleeding out on canvas that had seen too much blood already, his eyes wide with accusation and something worse, betrayal. Marcus kneeling beside his best friend, pressing his hands against wounds that wouldn't stop pumping crimson life onto the dirty floor. "Marcus!" Tommy's voice, barely a whisper. "He made you, didn't he? Made you choose." And Marcus had chosen. Christ help him, he'd chosen. "Open the door." One of the men outside spoke for the first time, his voice carrying easily through the thin walls. "We're not here to hurt anyone." Sophia moved toward the workbench where Marcus kept a tire iron, but he caught her wrist. His daughter's skin was ice cold, her pulse racing like a hummingbird's. "They're not Torino's people," Marcus said quietly. Wrong body language, too polite. Then who? The door opened without either of them moving toward it. The lock had been picked or bypassed so smoothly that Marcus heard nothing until the hinges creaked. Professional work, government work. Two men entered the garage, both wearing expensive overcoats over dark suits. The older one, maybe 50, with silver threading through black hair, carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. His partner was younger, Latino, with watchful eyes that catalogued every tool, every exit, every potential weapon in Marcus's workspace. Mr. Castellano, Miss Volkov. The older man nodded respectfully to each of them. Agent David Chen, FBI. This is Agent Rivera. We need to talk. Sophia's maiden name. They'd done their homework. About what? Marcus kept his voice steady, falling back on habits learned during his brief stint in county lockup 30 years ago. Never volunteer information, never admit anything, never trust a badge. Vincent Torino, Thomas Ricci, and a conversation that took place in a hotel room 3 blocks from the Riverside warehouse on October 14, 1995. The garage went quiet except for the sound of snow hitting the metal roof. Marcus felt his knees threaten to buckle. No one knew about that hotel room. He'd never told anyone, not his wife, not his lawyer, not the priests who'd tried to save his soul during the dark years after Tommy's death. I don't know what you're talking about, he managed. Agent Chen smiled without warmth. Mr. Castellano, tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., your granddaughter has a scheduled appointment at Children's Memorial Hospital for her 3rd round of experimental chemotherapy. The treatment costs $18,000 per session, and your daughter's insurance covers approximately 30%. Sophia made a sound like she'd been punched. How do you? Because we've been watching Vincent Torino for 15 years, and everyone in his orbit eventually comes to our attention. Chen stepped deeper into the garage, his shoes leaving wet prints on the oil-stained concrete, including the daughter of Marcus Castellano, who's been fighting in underground tournaments that Torino uses to launder money and eliminate competition. Marcus's vision began to tunnel. The FBI had known. They'd known about Sophia's fights, about Emma's illness, probably about Torino's phone call 20 minutes ago, which meant they'd been watching, gathering evidence, building a case while his granddaughter got sicker and his daughter killed people for money. The tournament invitation isn't random, Rivera spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a faint accent. Torino's using it to tie up loose ends, clean house before he disappears. You're not competitors. You are witnesses he can't afford to leave alive. Then arrest him, Sophia snapped. If you know so much, if you've been watching for 15 years, Vincent Torino is very careful, very patient, and very good at making problems disappear. Chen's expression darkened, but he's also arrogant. Tomorrow night's tournament is the first time he's surfaced personally in over a decade. It's our best chance to take him down. Marcus understood before Sophia did. He'd lived long enough to recognize the shape of a deal being offered, the particular tone federal agents used when they needed something they couldn't simply take. You want us to go, he said. You want us to walk into that arena knowing it's a death trap. We want you to help us end this, Chen replied. Before anyone else dies, before your granddaughter becomes another casualty of Vincent Torino's very long memory. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Blue Island in a blanket that would be grey and dirty by morning. Inside the garage, Marcus Castellano stared at 2 federal agents and realized that 28 years of running from his past had led him right back to the place where it all began. In a room where violence was currency and blood was the only honest language anyone spoke. Marcus stared at Agent Chen, feeling the weight of 28 years pressing against his chest like a concrete slab. The federal agent's confident smile, the casual way he'd mentioned that hotel room, it all felt wrong. Too convenient. Too perfectly timed. You said someone called who knew Tommy Ricci, Marcus said slowly. Someone who remembered that night. Chen exchanged a glance with Rivera. We have sources. People who were there, who saw what really happened. Bullshit. The word came out harder than Marcus intended. Everyone who was there is dead. Torino made sure of that. Not everyone, Mr. Castellano. The garage fell silent except for the wind rattling the metal walls. Sophia was watching the exchange with growing suspicion, her fighter's instincts picking up on something Marcus was only beginning to understand. "The woman on the phone," Sophia said quietly. "She wasn't one of your sources, was she?" Rivera shifted uncomfortably, his hand moving toward his coat. The movement was subtle, practiced, but Marcus caught it. In 40 years of reading people who made their living with violence, he'd learned to recognize the tells. "Dad," Sophia's voice carried a warning. "Look at their shoes." Marcus glanced down. Both agents wore expensive leather Oxfords, polished to a mirror shine despite walking through 6 inches of snow. No salt stains, no watermarks, the kind of pristine condition that was impossible unless you'd changed footwear recently, or unless you'd never been outside at all. "How long have you been in the building?" Marcus asked. Chen's smile faltered for the first time. "We just arrived." "Through a locked door you opened without making a sound. In a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone else's business, and Mrs. Kowalski next door calls the real cops every time a stray cat looks at her garbage cans wrong." Marcus felt something cold settling in his stomach. "But no one called tonight, did they? Mr. Castellano, you're being paranoid." "Am I?" Marcus stepped closer, ignoring the way Rivera's hand tensed. "Because the FBI doesn't make house calls at midnight in snowstorms. They schedule appointments. They bring backup. They sure as hell don't show up alone to recruit witnesses for operations that could get them killed." Sophia moved to flank the agents, her body language shifting into the predatory stance Marcus recognized from his own fighting days. "The phone call came from inside the building, didn't it? Someone who was already here watching us." Chen sighed, and when he looked up, his expression had changed completely. The federal authority was gone, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. "Vincent always said you were smarter than you looked, Marcus, though not quite smart enough to stay hidden." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not Agent Chen, Vincent Torino himself, wearing a federal agent's face and speaking with practiced authority. The man who'd destroyed his life, who'd killed his best friend, who'd spent 3 decades crafting an elaborate revenge. "Impossible," Sophia breathed. You can't be." 28 years of plastic surgery and voice coaching," Torino said conversationally. "Amazing what money can buy, though I admit maintaining this particular identity has been exhausting. Do you have any idea how tedious federal bureaucracy can be?" Marcus's legs nearly gave out. The FBI surveillance, the offers of protection, the carefully constructed narrative about taking down the criminal empire, all of it had been theater. Torino hadn't just been watching them. He'd been directing every moment of their lives for years. "Emma," Sophia whispered. "Is perfectly healthy," Torino replied. "The medical records were surprisingly easy to falsify once I acquired the hospital's computer system. Though the chemotherapy bills are quite real, I do enjoy authentic details." The revelation crashed over Marcus like a tsunami of understanding. Emma wasn't dying. Sophia hadn't been fighting to save her daughter's life. She'd been training for this moment because Torino had convinced her the training was necessary. Every underground bout, every brutal victory, every choice that had driven her deeper into violence, all of it orchestrated by the man standing 10 feet away, wearing the face of someone else entirely. "The tournament," Marcus said numbly. "Oh, that's quite real, though somewhat smaller than advertised. Just you, Marcus, and me, and 30 years of unfinished business." Torino, Chen, whoever he was now, smiled with genuine warmth. "Did you really think I'd forgotten what you took from me that night? What you cost me when you chose to save your own skin instead of your best friend?" Marcus felt the walls of the garage pressing inward, the weight of his past crushing down like an avalanche. Vincent Torino hadn't just survived the decade since Tommy Ricci's death. He'd thrived, built an empire, and used every resource at his disposal for one purpose: bringing Marcus Castellano to his knees. "The Iron King," Torino said softly. "Tomorrow night we finish what we started in 1995, and this time, Marcus, there won't be anyone left to make deals with." The silence that followed Torino's words stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, drowning out the wind and snow battering the garage walls. 30 years of carefully constructed lies were crumbling around him, and standing in the wreckage was the ghost he'd tried so desperately to outrun. "You want to know what I took from you that night?" Marcus's voice came out as a rasp. "I was trying to save him. Tommy was my best friend. Tommy was my brother." Torino's composure cracked for the first time, revealing something raw and vicious underneath the federal agent's mask, not by blood, but by choice. "We came up together from nothing, built everything together, until you decided his life was worth less than your reputation." Sophia stepped closer to her father, her eyes never leaving the man she'd known as Agent Chen. "What really happened in 1995? Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a secret he'd carried for 3 decades pressing against his chest like a physical thing. He'd never told anyone the complete truth. Not his wife during their bitter divorce proceedings, not the priests who'd tried to counsel him through his guilt, not even himself during the long nights when whiskey couldn't quiet the memories. "There was supposed to be a fix," Marcus said quietly. "Torino, Vincent, he owned half the fighters in the circuit, had judges, referees, even some cops in his pocket. But Tommy found out about it. Found records, bank transfers, the whole operation. So you killed him to keep him quiet," Torino said. "No." The word exploded out of Marcus with volcanic force. "I tried to get him to walk away, told him to take what he'd found and disappear, start over somewhere else. But Tommy was always too honest for his own good," Sophia said, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. Marcus nodded, the memory playing out behind his closed eyelids like a film he'd watched 10,000 times. He said he was going public, going to expose everything, bring down the whole network. He didn't care what it cost him. What it cost him? Torino's laugh was bitter as winter wind. What about what it would cost everyone else? The fighters who needed those fixed matches to feed their families? The people who depended on the money flowing through that system? "So, you had him killed." Sophia's voice was flat, emotionless. "I had him convinced to take a dive," Torino corrected. "One last fight. Lose quietly, take the money, disappear forever. Everyone walks away alive and wealthy." Marcus opened his eyes, meeting Torino's gaze directly for the first time. But Tommy wouldn't stay down. Even when he was supposed to lose, he kept fighting, kept trying to win. The memory crystallized with painful clarity. Tommy on his back in the ring, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, the crowd screaming for violence. The other fighter, a vicious kid from Detroit named Ramon Vega, standing over him with fists like hammers. And Tommy trying to get up, always trying to get up, because he'd never learned how to quit. "Vega hit him too hard," Marcus continued. "You could hear the sound from the cheap seats, like a melon hitting concrete. And that's when you made your choice," Torino said softly. "When you decided which side you were really on." Marcus felt Sophia's eyes burning into him, waiting for the truth he'd never spoken aloud. The choice that had haunted him every day since, jump into the ring to help his dying friend, or stay in his corner and let Vincent Torino's operation continue undisturbed. "I froze," Marcus whispered. "For maybe 10 seconds, I just stood there while Tommy bled out on the canvas. Because I knew if I helped him, if I tried to save him, Vincent would destroy everything I'd built. My gym, my reputation, my family." 10 seconds, Torino repeated. "Long enough for my brother to die alone. By the time I got to him, it was too late. Tommy was gone, and you," Marcus pointed at the man wearing Agent Chen's face, "you looked at me across that ring and smiled. Because you'd won. You'd shown me exactly who I really was when it mattered." Sophia's hand found his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. "Dad." "I killed my best friend through cowardice," Marcus said. "I let him die because I was too afraid to lose what I had, and Vincent's been waiting 30 years to remind me of that choice." Torino straightened his tie, the federal agent persona sliding back into place like a well-worn mask. "Tomorrow night, Marcus, you'll face the same choice again. But this time, it won't be Tommy bleeding out in front of you. He glanced meaningfully at Sophia, and Marcus felt his world tilt sideways. This time, Torino continued, it will be your daughter, and we'll see if the Iron King has learned anything about what really matters after all these years. The garage door began to rattle upward, revealing the snowy night beyond. Somewhere in that darkness, Marcus knew, death was waiting with the patience of a gravedigger. And this time, there would be nowhere left to run. The garage door closed with a metallic bang, leaving Marcus and Sophia alone in the sudden silence. The overhead fluorescents hummed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the oil-stained concrete. Marcus could feel his daughter's stare burning into him, could sense the questions building behind her eyes like storm clouds. "No," Sophia said finally, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "We're not doing this again." Marcus turned to face her, expecting anger, accusation, maybe even disgust. Instead, he found something far more dangerous in her expression, determination. "Sophia, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She moved to the workbench, began pulling items from drawers with mechanical precision. A roll of medical tape, a small bottle of industrial solvent, a box cutter. "I understand that Vincent Torino has spent 30 years orchestrating this moment. I understand that he's been playing with our lives like we're pieces on a chessboard. Then you understand why we have to run. Tonight. Get Emma and disappear before..." "Before what?" Sophia spun around, her eyes blazing. "Before he finds us again? Before he manipulates some other crisis to draw us back? Dad, he turned me into a killer while convincing me I was saving my daughter's life. He made you watch your best friend die 30 years ago. Running isn't going to end this." Marcus felt something cold spreading through his chest. "Sophia, no, I won't let you." "You won't let me?" The words came out sharp enough to cut steel. "You don't get to make that choice anymore. You lost that right when you spent 15 years hiding from your past while I raised Emma alone." The accusation hit harder than any punch Marcus had ever taken in the ring, because it was true. While he'd been nursing his guilt and arthritis in this garage, Sophia had been building a life, raising a daughter, fighting battles he'd been too broken to help with. "I was trying to protect you," he said quietly. "By abandoning us, by letting us struggle while you felt sorry for yourself." Sophia's voice cracked, revealing the pain beneath the anger. "I needed my father, Dad. Emma needed her grandfather. But you were too busy mourning Tommy Ricci to notice your own family falling apart." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to explain about the nightmares, the guilt, the way Tommy's face haunted every mirror. Instead, he found himself seeing Sophia clearly for the first time in years. Not as the angry teenager who'd blamed him for her mother's depression, not as the adult daughter who'd shut him out of her life, but as the woman she'd become despite his failures. Strong, capable, willing to fight for what mattered. "Torino's right about one thing," Sophia continued, her voice steadying. "Tomorrow night you'll face the same choice you faced 30 years ago. But this time you won't face it alone. I can't let you get in that ring with him. Vincent isn't just dangerous. He's had 3 decades to plan this. He'll have advantages, weapons, backup. Then we'd better start planning too." Sophia pulled out her phone, began scrolling through contacts. "I know people. Fighters who owe me favors. Underground medics who can patch bullet wounds without asking questions. Even a few cops who aren't completely dirty." Marcus watched his daughter work, saw the same tactical mind that had made him a champion in his prime. But where his fighting had been fueled by anger and pride, Sophia's was driven by something purer, love. Love for Emma. Love for the family Torino was threatening to destroy. "There's something else," Marcus said. "Something I never told you about that night." Sophia looked up from her phone. "Tommy didn't find those records by accident. Someone gave them to him. Someone on the inside who wanted to bring down Vincent's operation." Marcus's throat felt raw. "I think it was me he was trying to protect. If the fights were exposed, if the FBI investigated, they would have found out about the money I'd taken, the fixed matches I'd been part of." "You were in on it?" "Not willingly. But Vincent had leverage. Photos of me taking money, recordings of conversations. If I didn't cooperate, Marcus shook his head. Tommy died trying to save me from my own mistakes. And I let him. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing this final piece of the puzzle. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but utterly certain. Then, tomorrow night, we save him. Sophia, not literally, but we finish what he started. We end Vincent Torino's empire, and we make sure Tommy's death finally means something. She met her father's eyes. Together, Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw something he'd thought was lost forever. Not just his family, but his chance at redemption. His opportunity to be the man Tommy had believed he could be. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the garage, something warm was building, something that felt almost like hope. All right, Marcus said quietly. Let's finish this. The snow had stopped falling by the time they finished their preparations. Marcus stood at the grimy window of his garage, watching the first pale fingers of dawn creep across Blue Island's sleeping streets. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, 6 in the morning, and he found himself thinking about Tommy Ricci's funeral, how the same bells had rung that grey October day in 1995. Behind him, Sophia was cleaning her hands with industrial degreaser, washing away the last traces of gun oil and electrical tape. They'd spent the night turning the garage into a fortress, rigging tripwires and pressure plates with the methodical precision of soldiers preparing for siege. But Marcus knew it wouldn't be enough. Vincent Torino hadn't survived 3 decades by underestimating his enemies. He'll come at sunset, Sophia said, joining him at the window. Torino always liked the symbolism of endings. Marcus nodded, remembering how Vincent used to schedule the biggest fights for Twilight, claiming the dying light made everything more dramatic. Back then, it had seemed like showmanship. Now Marcus understood it was something darker, a man's obsession with controlling not just the violence but its poetry. I called Emma this morning, Sophia continued quietly. Told her grandpa was taking her to Disney World next month. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sophia, she doesn't remember you very well, but she's excited to meet you properly. Sophia's voice carried no accusation, just a bone-deep weariness. I figured if we're going to die today, she should at least have something to look forward to first. They stood in silence, father and daughter, watching the neighborhood wake up around them. Mrs. Kowalski emerged from her house to collect her newspaper. The Korean war vet 2 doors down began his morning ritual of raising the flag in his tiny front yard. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 30 years of violence was about to come full circle in the auto repair shop they passed every day. I never meant for it to go this far, Marcus said finally. When I took that first payment from Vincent, I told myself it was just once, just enough to keep the gym afloat. Sophia touched the window glass, her breath fogging the cold surface. How many times did you throw fights? 17. The number came out without hesitation. He'd counted them obsessively over the years, like rosary beads of shame. Tommy knew about all of them. He'd watch from the corner, see me holding back in the clinches, pulling my punches just enough to lose on points. Never said a word, but I could tell it was killing him. Why didn't he stop you? Marcus almost smiled at the question's innocence. Because he understood what I was too proud to admit, that I wasn't good enough to be champion on my own. That, without Vincent's manipulation, I was just another broken-down fighter heading for poverty and brain damage. The admission hung between them like smoke. Marcus had never spoken it aloud before, this core truth that had eaten away at him for decades. He'd convinced himself the guilt was about Tommy's death, about his moment of cowardice in the ring. But underneath it all was something more corrosive, the knowledge that his entire reputation had been built on a lie. The Iron King, Sophia said, and there was something almost gentle in how she spoke the old nickname. You know what Emma calls you when I mention you? The ghost grandfather. Because you only exist in stories. Marcus felt his eyes burning. Through the window, he could see his reflection superimposed on the awakening street. A 58-year-old man with arthritic hands and too many regrets, wearing a face that bore only faint traces of the fighter he'd once been. After today, what will you tell her about me? Sophia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a certainty that reminded Marcus painfully of his younger self, back when he'd still believed in heroes and happy endings. That her grandfather was a man who made mistakes, who carried guilt for things that weren't entirely his fault. But when it mattered, when his family needed him, he remembered how to fight for something bigger than himself. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the snow clouds. In a few hours, Vincent Torino would come for them, wearing whatever face served his purpose, carrying 3 decades of carefully nursed hatred. There would be violence and possibly death. But for the first time since 1995, Marcus Castellano felt something he'd almost forgotten, the quiet strength that came from knowing exactly why he was fighting. He reached for Sophia's hand, found it warm and steady, calloused from years of training he'd been too absent to witness. His daughter, his legacy, his chance at redemption. "Let's give Emma a story worth telling," he said. The church bells rang again, calling the faithful to morning prayer. Marcus listened until the last note faded, then turned away from the window. Outside, Blue Island continued its patient routine, unaware that ghosts were finally ready to rest.